All right, folks, here's a couple different things to keep in mind. Let me get rid of this and get rid of this. And so we're at very different points, right, to keep in mind, but I want to make sure that I cover this next piece so that makes sense. As long as you get to do one of these and one goes right, the rest of them, it's the same exact process. So you don't have to get through all 7. I know some got through all 7. Some got through like 2, because it took a little bit longer to figure out. But the answers I want to give you are this. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The answers are 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, and I think 4. Right, so make sure that you just write these answers down so that way when you can do this, I want it, and you don't have to do all of these, but if you can get through like 4 of them, and if you got the first 4 right, you're gonna get the rest of them right. That's the big picture. You don't have to do 20 different problems for it. Right? So if you can get through the first 3 or 4, that means you understand the process. You don't have to keep laboring through it. Right? So there you go. So I'm going to pause, and I will be available. I'm going to try to stop with a few minutes left so I can hand out those quizzes from yesterday. And then I can answer some questions there. I can answer more questions about this handout if it's helpful for you. But what I'm going to do right now is I want to make sure that I can talk about the supply of labor. So what we're going to do now, here's what we've done. This is as far as we've gotten. The MRP is downward sloping. So that's as far as we've gotten as far as understanding why this is. And we just learned there's actually a couple different ways that you would, there's a couple different slopes. But we're just going to choose one of them. This is what we figured out. What we're going to do now is we're going to figure out why, if this is a perfectly competitive labor market, why the supply curve looks like this. And we're going to learn about why in an imperfectly competitive market, we don't have to explain this. We've already learned why the MRP is downward sloping, diminishing margin returns. We've learned different things. It's the demand, same thing as your demand. We're going to learn now why this is the supply and this is the MRC. This next, probably in about 5 minutes, after I get through this first part, this is my favorite thing, the most interesting thing I think about this chapter. And so we'll get to that in a second. All right, so I'm gonna blah 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 blah. Okay. All right, here's a couple things. Hey. Perfect competition in the product market, reality or fake? Perfect competition in the product market, reality or fake? Fake. Nothing like it, right? It doesn't exist. We didn't have thousands of firms, the same exact size, yada, yada, yada. Perfect competition in the labor market, so we're actually talking about you. If someone were to walk in here and if they were to identify you, like, what type of labor market are you? What type of laborer? Now, we're not talking about what type of product that you make. We're talking about you as the actual market, the supply and demand for you. If you were to fall into this bucket, right, they would be considered a perfectly competitive labor market, which technically doesn't exist, but I'm going to give you an example of one that's pretty close to it. So one is this. This should look familiar, except for now hiring people. If you have thousands of firms pretty much hiring the same exact type of person, that's perfectly competitive. Thousands of firms hiring the same labor. Why does this not make sense? Well, because all labor people are different. Victor's skill sets are different than Max's, that are different than Ava's. Everyone's skill set is different. This is kind of assuming that we have thousands of firms and they're all hiring this same exact group of people. Well, it doesn't really exist. And the challenge is this. The challenge also is that these people have zero wage-making ability. They have no way to actually influence how much they're paid. That's what zero wage-making ability means. All right, now I'm going to give you a comparison contrast, and I'm going to give you an example that's kind of close to it, but it's not quite there yet. this is, nope, that's not what I want to do. This is marginal cost, which is also kind of like your supply curve. And this is demand, this is MR. What is this? What is this a graph of? I didn't give you much other details. What is this a graph of? All of you, what's this a graph of? Okay, well, look at the demand. In it, remember, this is a perfectly competitive labor market. Remember chapter 9? This was a perfectly competitive product. Well, this is a perfectly competitive product market. This was just perfect competition from chapter 9. Like, how do I know that? Well, this was supply demand. Remember, they were price takers. They were price takers. The demand curve is perfectly elastic. Here, they're wage takers. These people have zero influence over what they can actually make. So this is what the industry looks like. It's a simple supply-demand curve. This is the market for a perfectly competitive labor market. But the challenge is I'm going to add this as MRP, which is your demand. Since they have zero ability to influence the price, they are called wage takers. Those are price takers. These are wage takers. Similar, difference. Similar, different. Same, different. Right? Same, different. We have a perfectly elastic line, perfectly elastic line. If they get it from the industry, they get it from the industry. Same. The difference is price taker, wage taker. But they're both takers. So I just want you to see that, like how did we get to this? Like, oh, well, my crap, that looks just like perfect competition from chapter 9. Because that was perfect competition in the product market. This is perfect competition in the labor market. Right? But so before I go in and give you the next piece, what I want to show you is I need to talk about, I don't remember if I did this earlier on. I want to compare the difference between these two things. What they are. The marginal resource, and this may be on a previous page, I'm sorry if it had like a section for MRC. I'm going to give you what MRC and supply, like how they're the same and the different. This marginal resource cost I gave you earlier this is the additional cost to add your input, right? So I gave you that earlier, I know. This is how much it actually costs you to add an input, like a labor. The supply curve actually represents what wage you are willing to work for. That's what the supply curve represents. It represents you as a group. It represents you as a group, how much you're willing to work for it. And I'm going to explain why, in a second, I'm going to explain why this supply curve is upward sloping. Okay, so I think it actually has that. Maybe is that where it comes next? All right. Why does the industry curve look like this? Random question. If all of you, let's just say that none of you had a job. Well, I'll just say reality. This is reality right now. Looking for your honest answer. How many in here would take a job if I offered a job that you liked the job and I paid you $15 an hour? How many would take that job? Okay, we got a few. Okay, good. Because maybe that means you're not employed. Maybe it means you're someplace and you're making less money. Whatever. How many would take a job? And honestly, how many would take a job if I paid you $20 an hour? Okay, now what just happened here is like 8 more people put their hands up. Why? Because there's a greater willingness to work when you're making more money. So if this is your wage. So before we had price here, this is your wage. This is quantity of your input or your labor. Well, as the wage increases, there is an increasing desire for more people to take that job. And so this is the reality. The reality of it is, this is why. Has anyone here switched jobs because of pay? Like actually went from one job to another because it paid better? Has anyone done that here? Okay, good. All right, both of you have. Were they like the same kind of jobs? Okay, so the reason why the company had to offer more money is to incentivize Lillian and Lizzie to leave their job and come to this one. That's what an upward sloping supply curve means, right? Because the incentive is, so anyway, so that's what, we have our supply curve here and we got the dot, dot, dot. Now, we know that we are wage takers in this example. So in this case here, my supply curve is the same thing as marginal resource cost because of this. I'm going to start here. I'm going to pay you $10. Okay, this is perfectly competitive, so I'm going to pay you $10. So if I paid you $10, that was your wage, which is your supply curve. What was what's the marginal resource cost? How much did it actually cost me to employ you? $10. Okay, good. I'm paying you $10, right? What was the change in the total cost to hire you? 10, because my total went up by 10, right? I'm paying you $10. This is perfectly competitive. What is your marginal resource cost? Because I'm now hiring you for $10. $10. So this wage is the same exact thing as this, because the wage is constant at $5, $10, $20, whatever it is. So that's only for a perfectly competitive firm. Pausing, because I need to let that sink in and go, okay, I get that. And you follow, this is the point, and you follow up to that. I want to make sure why you know that you know that this is a wage taker, because we have zero ability to change anything. Here's my really quick example. I got a buddy of mine, one of my best friends from college. He is a sugar beet farmer, right? And they actually farm other things, some wheat and stuff, but sugar beets. What they do is they actually hire him and a lot of families in that area, right? A whole bunch of families that's up in the Fargo-Moorhead area. They hire migrant workers, okay? If you know what a migrant worker is, it is a group of people who migrate throughout the U.S. and do farming jobs. And what they do is they have the migrant workers come in and they actually work the fields. They're pulling weeds. They are, they're taking up rocks so the combines don't break a disc. There's different things that people get brought in. Now, the closest example of this is if all of those farmers in hiring the migrant workers and to bring someone in to pay someone to do the work here, if they all said, we're all going to pay you $12 an hour, $15, whatever it is. We're all going to pay you $15 an hour to do this. It doesn't matter about what your skill set is. I don't care if you're 35 years old and you've been doing this for 10 years, or if you're 25 years old and you're brand new doing it. It doesn't matter. All of you are doing this one job and you're all going to be paid $15 an hour. That's perfectly competitive because they have zero ability. These people have zero ability to actually influence how much they're making. Because all the farmers have basically paying them the same exact amount of money. Right now, it doesn't really exist that way because some farmers actually do pay more money. Why? Because they need more people. They have to provide an incentive to leave one place to come to another. That's the reality. So in theory, that's the theory behind it. Right? So we're not quite there, but we're close to having something like that. Just like agriculture was from before. I'm going to skip that, skip that, skip that. This is the one. No, skip that. We already kind of did some of that. So this is the one I think that I find more interesting. And more interesting, more details for you. What we're going to do now is this. We are going to prove this. This is what we're going to prove right now. Okay? This is an imperfectly competitive one. Well, what are characteristics of an imperfectly competitive factor market or labor market? What are those characteristics? One, well, we have a whole bunch of firms. We have many firms, not thousands. We have many firms that are hiring the labor. Many, just like monopolistic competition. We have many firms hiring the labor. And what we also know is that these firms have wage-making ability. They have wage-making ability. which means that they can actually pay, because this is more realistic, they can actually pay people higher amounts of money to incentivize them away from someplace else. Right? So this is more real, and I'll tell you what the fake part of it is, but the theoretical part. Okay, so in this example, this is like monopolistic competition in the product market. Just like in the product market, we have something called a monopsony, and if it's helpful, like this is a term, you're like, what the heck? You're just making words up. This is, I don't know how I say it. I'm just going to put next to it. Monopoly. A monopsony is not a made-up word, is a monopoly in the hiring of people. This is when you basically have one firm that kind of controls the hiring of everybody. Anyone see the movie Roadhouse? It's a really good movie. It's really not appropriate to talk about it in a high school classroom, is it? Anyone see the movie Roadhouse? Okay, that's good because you shouldn't, because you're less than 18 years of age and it's an R-rated movie. In the movie Roadhouse, there was a small town, and there was a man. I'm gonna have to edit this out. There was a man who basically ran the entire town. He owned the dealership, he owned the restaurants, he owned the bars, he owned the liquor that goes to the bars, he owned everything. So everybody in this town worked for this one guy. That's an example of a monopsony. When you only have one employer that basically employs everyone. And you know what that person can do? That person can make up all the rules. Now, this is the similar thing to it. Does anyone have any family in like the Grand Rapids, Hibbing area here? Okay, that's called the Iron Range in Minnesota. And for a long time, those towns were made and held up by monopsonies that were like the mining. Those are mining towns. And so those towns used to be big, really successful. And now some of them have kind of gone by the wayside because of monopsony. It either shut down or it really cut back things, right? So a monopsony is when you have an example of when you only have one person hiring things. So your homework is to stream Roadhouse this weekend, but don't do it in front of your parents. All right, so here's what this looks like. So I'm going to ask you again, what does a labor supply curve look like? A labor supply, because this is MRP, and that's the same thing as your demand. What does a labor supply curve look like? It's upward sloping. And by the way, mine's curved. It doesn't have to be curved. It can be straight. Either way, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Just like marginal cost is like this, you could do it like that. It doesn't matter. So that's what the labor supply curve looks like. Again, it has to be like Lizzie and Lillian. They actually left a company to go to a different company because they gave them a raise. They gave them more money. That's what this supply curve is. I have to incentivize someone to come to my industry, I have to pay them more money. That's why it's upward sloping. All right, so here is it's upward sloping. Now, this is where it gets, well, I got a story about this, but I'll give you the example. I'm just gonna stick up here. Lillian and Lizzie, I currently employ both of you at $20 an hour. Okay, congratulations, just got pay rates. I employ you at $20 an hour. Sophia, I want to entice you to come over and provide you incentives to come over to my company. All right? You're currently working someplace else and making $20 an hour, so that's not going to do it for you, right? So, in order to incentivize you to come to my company, what do I have to do? I gotta pay you more money. So now each of those two people make $20 an hour. Now I'm going to pay you $22 an hour because that's going to give you the incentive to come over to my company. This is where theory comes in. Theoretically, right? Theoretically, if I paid her $22 an hour, what do I have to do to the other two people? Theoretically. I'll again. I got to pay them $22 an hour. Yeah, this is theoretical, and I'll give you the theory, and I'm going to give you the reality. I have to pay them $20. Now, why would I have to pay them $22 an hour? And they're gonna get mad at me, and I'm gonna have a revolt, and I want to have my people happy, yada 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 yada. All right, so I want you to do the math behind here. Each of those people were employed at $20. I want to employ Sophia and pay her $22, but I have to give them a pay raise. What is the actual not the wage? The wage is 22. This is the wage is the supply curve. This is 22. If I have to pay the other two people $2 a piece, what is the actual marginal resource cost? How much does it actually cost me to actually employ Sophia? Because it's not just $22. It is $26. And you may know, how are you get to 26? I got to pay her 22. I got to give her a $2 raise and her a $2 raise. And so that's what this looks like. It's like all of a sudden now, the wage was 22, and the wage is like your supply curve. That was 22, but the marginal resource cost is actually 26. If I wanted to now hire Frankie, I'm gonna hire Frankie at $24 an hour. And I am employing 3 people here. What's my actual marginal resource cost of hiring Frankie? If this is 24, what's my actual resource cost here? Can you do that math behind that quickly? And let's see if we kind of get what's going on here. So I had 3 at 22. Now I'm going to hire a 4th person. Pay that 4th person $24 an hour as a wage. I want to know what the actual cost is to me to actually bring that person on. Okay, I have a number in my head. Victor, do you have a number in your head?
30.
How would you get to 30?
You have to pay the 3 other people $2 more each.
Okay, so I want to give you a statement. And that statement is this. In order for me to hire more people, I have to pay all of my current employees a higher amount of money. Thus, it costs me more money to bring them on. Folks, that is called the wage effect. Does that sound like the price effect? Which was, in order for me to sell more, I had to reduce my quantity on all my previous units. Thus, I lose my revenue for these units. Right, so what we end up seeing is this. Your MRC has to be higher than your actual supply curve because you have to, because I'll give you this, it's here, we have to increase their wages. What does this do? The MRC becomes higher, right? And so the conclusion is your MRC is greater than your supply curve. And remember, your supply curve represents your actual wage. And this is only in an imperfectly competitive labor market, but it's due to the wage effect. And I'm going to write this here. I'm going to remember, I'm going to say, like price effect. Right? So it's like if you remember the price effect, it's like, oh, well, this is just called the wage effect. And I'm going to give you the reality behind it before I stop to hand out the activities. Okay. Here's our mic drop of the moment, right? Here's the mic drop. Why is the MR less than a demand curve in an imperfectly competitive product market, like monopolistic competition? Why is the MR less than a demand curve? Ava? Why is the MR less than a demand curve for like a monopoly?
It decreases faster.
Yeah, why is it decrease factor? Due to the what? Those 2 words that are written in green on this board. Because of the price effect. I have to reduce the price in all my previous units, yada, yada, yada. The MRC is above the supply curve. What is it, Arnish? Why is the MRC higher than the supply curve? Because of the wage effect. And so your ability to connect the dots between the product market and to help you and understand, see how this is. The reason why this is the case is just because of the wage effect. I have to pay all my previous employees or current employees more money. And so the actual cost to me gets higher. And so this is why, and this is what we're gonna start here on Monday. This is where the optimal output is, because that's where MRC equals MRP. And then we have to go down for the quantity. But let me ask you, which wage, 1 or 2? What level would we pay our people? 1 or 2? If you were the business, would you rather pay them 1 or 2? So if you think about it, what you do is you go MRP and MRC, and you go down to the wage, just like here, we went MR and MC, and went up. And we went up here. So remember, everything's a flipped. Instead of going up, we're going down. Right? That was the key thing about that. Right, so we're gonna do a. All right, that's it. Peace out, YouTube. Oh my God, there it is.